Tracing the Lines by M.G. Gallows. 2 months after Death Dealers. The Rimbault Society library was 900 meters tall, with a diameter of 300 meters. It contained 300 levels, accessible via a central atrium stairwell. 127 of those floors were filled to capacity, containing the most complete record of human knowledge ever assembled. Each tome was priceless, and many contained truths that, if exposed to the untold, would fundamentally change human history and civilization. Alex Foster was getting crumbs on them. The Necrourge looked out of place in a library with the build and clothes of a common laborer, but the fresh scars on his face hinted at a darker, more dangerous occupation. He sat with one leg draped over the armrest of a plush chair, with a copy of Luminous Beings, a treatise on the dream, Loci and Storm by Ingvar Crow, open in his lap. As he flipped a page, he took a bite of something in his hand, and particulate matter settled between the pages against the spine. Chicken shawarma. The librarian's voice echoed in my mind. She flickered about somewhere on the 12th floor landing. It's been a chore not to introduce myself. I cleared my throat. Alex Foster, you are eating within the library. He looked up and all but leapt out of his seat, holding the book at arm's length. Oh, hey, Luce. Sorry, I got hungry. You didn't say I couldn't. This is a library, I said. And how would I know you had smuggled food inside? A smile spread over his scarred lips. So if I'd ordered out, you could sense the labels. My shoulders tensed. Was he testing my abilities? Probing the library for weaknesses, my mind raced with the possibility of him exploiting my trust too. The librarian huffed. He's teasing you, Luciana. Stop being a prude. I took a breath and allowed my arms to relax. It is midnight Pacific Standard Time. You wish to be informed. He turned his wrist to look at his watch. It upended the wrap in his hand, and a hunk of tomato in sauce fell to the floor. Sorry. He gathered the litter, folded the food into aluminum foil, and pocketed it. Don't suppose you could save my place. Putting my annoyance aside, I cast a simple spell to return the book free of foreign matter to its place within the library. Floor 72. Isla H. Row 26, Shelf 9. You spent considerable time studying the Fae, I noted. Just trying to understand them. They seem crazy. I allowed a small smile to touch my lips. Their motivations are deceptively simple. As you may have read, the Fae, like all denizens of the dream, and the dream itself, are nourished by emotional sensations. When we sleep, our souls are more aware of the layered. The Fae can thus influence our dreams to provoke responses they find palatable. Alex Foster frowned. Do they mean us harm? I spread my hands, no more than sunlight or water, but you'll agree that overexposure can be harmful. A soul can endure and thrive in the dream, but our physical minds are more susceptible to permanent damage. Sleep acts as a buffer, minimizing the impact of potentially traumatic experiences. What if I found myself in the dream? Were you to visit in your corporeal form, you would find that the Fae have no concept of waking or sleeping, body or soul. Your frail organic form is no more real to them than a dream is to you, something to be worn and shed like a set of disposable clothes. And they have no concern for its well-being. I tilted my head. Though the Fae do understand death, a living soul provides them with the emotional resonance they crave. A dead soul departs beyond their reach, beyond the outer layered. They gain nothing from it. Alex Foster contemplated this and nodded. But there are worse states than dying, aren't there? That explains their tendency to try and trap people in their domain. My smile returned. Correct. So, they're trolls, he asked. I blinked. Some are trolls, yes. He snorted, and I sensed there was some context I was missing, but he did not elaborate. Instead, he stretched his arms. You're done for the night, then? Care to join me for a drink? A sharp cackle rang out in my head. Oh no, he's flirting with you. I winced at the librarian's mental intrusion. That would not be possible. My station does not allow for libations or free time. Alex Foster frowned. You don't get time off. When do you sleep? I and the other pillars are provided with a specialized alchemical diet. It negates the need for sleep. His eyebrows furrowed, and dreams. The seconds ticked by between us as I tried to formulate an answer. Not because I did not have one. I did not sleep, so logically I did not dream either. Yet I had never once considered the question, nor its implications. It evoked a sense of longing in me that I had not been aware of. Confused by the sensation, I sought solace in the one thing I valued over all else, knowledge, But as I combed out over billions of pages of information at the speed of thought, I found nothing that would put my mind at ease. Just comfortless logic. Loose. Alex Foster's voice was quiet. I combed an errant lock of hair behind my ear. No, the duties of the 6 pillars require us to serve the global community. It is always daylight somewhere. Reminding myself of my oaths gave me renewed focus. Being a pillar is more than a job. It is a calling I take with utmost seriousness. This library exists because men and women over the millennia sought to preserve knowledge. I am an inheritor to traditions older than the society, and I will sooner die than fail my charge. I stilled the shake in my voice. I was not accustomed to or comfortable with the feeling of having my life scrutinized. I feared Alex Foster would have more questions, and I was no longer prepared to answer in an objective, professional manner. He shook his head. Well, what if I brought coffee next time? Or is food and drink still verboten? The tension in my shoulders eased again. But I did not want to encourage disruptive behavior in the library. Even if the library's wards would protect them from anything he attempted, it was. He's offering you coffee, not trying to burn the place down, the librarian said. Poor boy is clamoring to be your white knight. Live like a nun if you must, but at least convince him you aren't so pathetic you need to be rescued. I felt heat touch my cheeks. Coffee would be acceptable. But I have duties to perform for now. I am compiling a final report concerning recent events. Oh, you mean the brothers' midnight? Correct. I understand your interest in this, but I must inform you that you will not be permitted to read these reports. It would be a conflict of interest. He sighed. Heaven forbid the wrongfully accused is not dangling from a hook anymore. I didn't respond. I could offer nothing to rectify his unfortunate standing with the society. Well, until next Saturday then. With a nod I turned and recalibrated the library's exit, shifting the glyphs that adorned the door so the junctionary portal would open to the West Bank Art Gallery, Earthside. The gallery itself was closed, so I adjusted the destination to open out to the parking lot. As Alex Foster passed, I caught the scent of churned earth and rainwater. They were, I knew, a byproduct of his magic. The smell of a fresh grave, cold yet inviting, with the unsettling sense of comfort that came from a final resting place. The librarian fluttered a laugh. Oh, what happened to objectivity, Luce? Saturday feeling so long away. Maybe he'll pour you a cup right now, just the way you like it, hot, dark, and deep inside you. Be silent. I hissed through clenched teeth. He turned. What's that? Good night, Alex Foster. I tilted my head in a bow. When he was gone, I rerouted the portal to connect to the Nexus crossways. As I did, a shadow fluttered overhead, crossing from one floor to the next like a swooping bird. Prude. Prude. I narrowed my eyes. Remain here. Detain any who intrude. The librarian sighed. As always, she sounded bored or hungry. Typically, she was both. The crossways were one of the oldest interdimensional constructs raised by the Society, a labyrinth of corridors connected to gates all over the Earth. During the time of its construction, the War of Caledonia was at its height, so security had been a priority. Those without keys and the appropriate maps would become hopelessly lost in a maze of traps that did not conform to the laws of time and space. Those maps were a matter of library record, however, so I knew the crossway's layout in its entirety. I covered the equivalent of several thousand kilometers with a few careful steps in the estuary-like demiplane. The gate I sought was a tall, round slab of rock formed by natural water erosion. Clutching a brass key in a pocket of my dress, I touched the stone and felt a shudder as it turned on its axis. I exited into the southern tablelands of Australia. A late afternoon sun, unfettered by clouds, all but blinded me, and my shoes became soaked in muddy soil. The pungent scent of a nearby bog made my stomach churn. But none of these were as offensive as the cloud of mosquitoes that formed to challenge my intrusion. Brushing the offending insects from my sweater, I retrieved a vial of ink from the interdimensional pocket space bestowed onto me as the pillar of knowledge. Dipping my fingernail into the ink, I hastily scrawled a repellent glyph into my forearm. The mosquitoes retreated, forming a buzzing layer about a meter away in all directions. A small line of bull ants, attempting to scale my skirt, retreated back into the soil. It would not keep the heat or filth out, but it would do for a brief visit. I followed a footpath to a narrow cave entrance, formed out of the rocky landscape. Seated on a throne like rock near the cave was a tiny black and yellow southern corroboree frog. The creature watched me as I approached, and its throaty ribbit was joined by others in the bog. With a sigh, I eased myself into the cave, aware of the amount of dirt and mud being collected by my heavy sweater and ankle-length dress. I dressed for my profession and for modesty. Venturing into the wild outdoors was not typical of either. The cave interior was sweltering. The corroboree's croak echoed down the passageway ahead of me, all but certain to alert anyone inside. An effective sentry. About 10 meters in, the cavern opened up, and I felt comfortable standing straight again. The pillar of alchemy sat cross-legged on a flat warp of rock, in front of a bowl of smoking incense. At 304, early Jimba was the oldest living human on the planet. He was a short, frail man with dark skin and curly silver hair. "Pillar Jimba," I said in greeting. He did not move. Were it not for the shift of his eyes under their lids, I would have been convinced of his death. He walks in the near layered. Shadows shifted further in the cave, and a tall, broad, yet feminine shape moved into the light. The woman had dark hair and skin, and despite her intimidating physique, she moved with feline grace. He's been walking for nearly 2 weeks. With practiced ease, she tipped a mortar of some unidentified substance into Pillar Jemba's lips. He thinks he can convince the Loci to help him repair the ozone damage over the continent. I considered early Jemba and his longtime protege, Gloria Freeheart. "I know why you're here." She vanished into the dark and emerged with a hefty hiking backpack. "Let's talk outside." Wingate's chief surgeon. The librarian's voice sounded like a distant whisper in my head, and the next in line as Pillar of Alchemy, I reminded her. The librarian giggled. "Did you notice her hips? I bet she's a tiger in the sheets." I followed Gloria Freeheart back out of the cave. Despite being much taller, she seemed to have no trouble extracting herself from the narrow passageway, emerging into the light of day with a stretch of her long limbs. "So sick of sitting in that cave wiping his ass," she said, with an audible American accent. "Dr. Freeheart, I apologize on behalf of my peer if he has interrupted your own work." Gloria Freeheart shook her head, an act that set her hip-length hair swaying like a tail. "Not your fault. Always understates his estimates. 2 days, 2 weeks. I have what you need." "You wrote the report." "I write all of his reports," Gloria Freeheart said. "Are you saying my handwriting looks too manly? Was it the way I looped my T's?" I blinked. I had noted it but assumed he was employing a scribe. "Add it to my resume, then." Gloria Freeheart dug into a pouch and produced a stack of paper wrapped in plastic, to protect it from the environment, I assumed. I opened it and brushed my fingers over the paper. As a graphurge, I had the ability to take in written information far more efficiently than ordinary human senses allowed. By holding the report, I was able to absorb every detail, following the curvature of the ink on paper at the speed of thought. When I was finished, I looked up at Gloria Freeheart. "Curious. I figured you'd say so." She combed her hands through her long hair. "So ask away." "Let us begin with the narcotic stigmata. The Brothers Midnight utilized it to enchant a large number of people. The drugs were distributed at large gatherings at prices that appealed to the city's chemically dependent." "That's a kind way of saying junkies," Gloria Freeheart said. "What is the conclusion of your analysis? You just read the report, I take it?" "I have found that asking follow-up questions can uproot details that may have been overlooked. Stigmata, or stig, is a combination of drugs. Carefully portioned, the drug was inert. By injecting the complete combination into the bloodstream, the drug would activate. A clever means to confound untold chemical analysis. We don't have a complete ingredient list, but you'll recognize more of the mundane components of zombie powder. The blowfish and datura flower extracts. The poison weakens the soul's grip on the mortal body, allowing it to be partially housed in an appropriate vessel, a bottle with a series of containment wards. Zombie astrals, they're called. Whoever holds the bottle has control over the body. Artificial containers are unreliable means to hold a soul, I said. A constant supply of the drug would be necessary. Is that where the pensive comes into play? Gloria Freeheart nodded and tapped the air with her finger. A common recreational drug among the versed in South America and the Caribbean. Easy enough for a Haitian bokor to produce. And highly addictive to the untold, even in small amounts. I also found Liechtenstein compound cut into it. Not a typical additive for pensive or zombie powder, from what I understand. I correlated what the library knew about the compound, Liechtenstein, a form of alchemical necrogy. One of its primary ingredients is human blood. They were necrogists. I can only guess what they would do with it, but I'm guessing it created a stronger bond between the zombie and whoever drugged them. Prolonged the effects. I nodded and turned toward the gate. Very well. Thank you, Dr. Freehart. You're not going to ask about the blood. I reread the report and met her eyes. The blood is of European descent, English and German. Is that relevant? Did any of the brothers look white to you? She asked. If the Liechtenstein was meant to improve the dealer's control over the addict, wouldn't he use his own blood? I frowned. My records on necrogy were sparse. The society had an antagonistic policy against burst who practiced one of the 666 forms of black arts. Statistics showed they were far too prone to breaching the edicts even in casual use of their magic. The keepers tended to destroy whatever information or relics they found on the black arts, a strategy intended to deny them greater insights into their magic and slow the accumulation of power. That meant I and the library were left with speculation, comparing similar forms of magic in the hope that a correlation could be deduced. I reread the report several more times in the span of a few heartbeats, just to commemorate the details. I see. I will confer with my colleagues about it. Gloria Freehart nodded. I'd better make sure Uncle Early hasn't fallen over again. Excuse me. She squeezed into the cave, and I found it troubling that Pilar Giemba was using one of the finest doctors and surgeons in the world as his personal caregiver. Surely there were others available to perform the task? I worried that my colleague was using his station for personal gain. But I knew almost nothing of the Pillar of Alchemy's duties outside of being the society's preeminent expert on the subject. My shoes were getting soggy, so I opened the gate and returned to the crossways. With a shudder, I rolled up my sleeve, removed the repellent spell, and rewrote it into a cleansing glyph. Dirt, mud, and murky water scattered from my body, as if I were a hound shaking water from my fur. Undignified, but I couldn't stand the feeling of bog water squishing between my toes. I would rather spend the rest of my days locked in a tower with my books than take another step into that giant, open toilet. A sigh escaped my lips. Unprofessional, Luciana. Mind yourself. Putting the stone gate behind me, I began my trek to China. A short time later, I emerged through a gate of black ceramic and jade into the Temple of Four Speaking Hands. A pair of keepers, the society's enforcers, stood guard at the entrance. I announced myself by scrawling my Simvolo, a curved feather quill with a four-sided diamond drop of ink at its tip, into the air with my magic. They nodded, and I was escorted through the temple's long granite hallways. The temple was high in the Altai Mountains, and a marvel of engineering despite being somewhere in the range of 15,000 years old. One of the oldest man-made constructs, cut from the rock of the mountains, with an ingenious system of gardens and sewers that allowed up to 1,000 people to live there indefinitely. The former pirate Bluesky rediscovered and rechristened the site in the 18th century and began his development of the Four Speaking Hands martial arts. His goal was to integrate all forms of personal warfare, both archaic and modern, magical and mundane, into one harmonious approach. According to his own journals, he did so to alleviate boredom and the ache of sobriety while hiding from his debtors. Life, as he was fond of saying, takes many paths. As I journeyed deeper into the temple, I saw the fruits of his endeavor. Keeper recruits in drab, sweat-stained GA practiced drills that would one day make them formidable hand-to-hand opponents. From swift, debilitating strikes and throws, to lethal dances with blades and clubs, to deafening point-blank firearms dueling, and finally to dazzling whirlwinds of magic in its many forms, adding potent force to every motion. Your enemy is a storm cloud, Bluesky said in his later years. You will not see his lightning, but in your final moments you will hear the thunder that follows. Keepers were trained to cripple and kill as quickly as possible. When an enemy can immolate someone with a thought, no other strategy is viable. But where's the fun in that, the librarian asked. The center of the temple was refurbished for handling the logistical needs of the keepers. Communication was vital for the globalized police force, and when they weren't training, the recruits were put to manning the different equipment, both magical and mundane, needed to provide intelligence to and from the field teams. Amidst the organized chaos of men and women, I found Charles Song Shuju. The squat, blunt-faced man looked every bit the pillar of order, a veritable rock of unbending control amidst a whirling river of underlings. I want all 6 teams prepared for the next stage, he said. Scour their texts to the bone. If the Haitians want to get back in our good graces, they will ensure not a crumb of their edict-flaunting contraband survives. Understood. Understood came a universal, disciplined response. They departed, making additional plans as they went. Pillar sung, I said. He clasped his fists behind him. You don't have an appointment, Del Lago. Yet, I am here on time. I request your final report concerning the brothers' midnight incident. It's in my office. Have Fitzsimmons fetch it. I will have questions, I said. There are details that may have been overlooked. I'm busy, he slashed his arm out at the room around him. I don't expect the secretary to understand. I felt my jaw clench. If you require him to do your job, perhaps you should trade. Pillar Sung turned his baleful stare my way. I felt the pressure of his anger as a tangible shift in gravity, pressing me backward. I had to lean into it to avoid falling over. When it abruptly ended, I corrected my stance. Had I not been prepared, I would have fallen at his feet and humiliated myself. Sung was not a man accustomed to having his position challenged, but pettiness was unbecoming of a pillar, or any who held a station within the Rimbault Society. Tedious, I thought, and contemplated what kind of tattoo I could etch on his face that would be the most unflattering. Forget the ink, the librarian hissed. Her anger was a storm cloud in the back of my mind. Claw your name into his forehead. Make him bleed. Ma'am? Ma'am? Pillar Sung's tall, skinny clerk emerged from the crowd, carrying a stack of paper in his arms. Pillar Del Lago, just the person I was hoping to see. I have Pillar Sung's report here for you. I took the report from him with a nod. Thank you, Corey Fitzsimmons. In truth, the clerk's arrival was too prompt to be random. But I suspected such disarming interruptions were how he balanced Pillar Sung's draconian leadership with the necessities of decorum. Corey Fitzsimmons would have made for an ideal diplomat, better suited to serving as attached to the Haitians, but perhaps he was where he needed to be, a cooler head in a room full of trained warriors with something to prove. The librarian grunted. Ignoring bullies is never as satisfying as gutting them. I took in the information from the report. Pillar Sung lurked nearby, ready to answer the questions he knew I would ask. It was as much a show of respect as I could hope for. All members of the brothers are accounted for. Pillar Sung offered a curt nod. 28 in total. All Haitian. He frowned. Why? The alchemy report suggests a member of European descent, potentially another necrourge. I saw him flex his jaw. The only white necrourge we counted was that backwater versed Foster. Have you tested his blood? Certainly you've had enough time, given how often he visits. His DNA has been logged, I said. Along with all pertinent details. The blood is not his. Does it not seem unusual to you, Pillar Sung? There could be more to this incident than face value. The Haitians let their rogue verse run loose, he growled. They bring their drugs and black magic to our territory, murder and prey upon the untold to fuel their profane rituals. Then another criminal stumbles into their operation and leads Sheriff Chakrabarti right to them. A closed and shut case, Pillar Del Lago. I held his gaze. The witness testimonies here are incomplete. I see nothing concerning the ritual they were attempting. They're dead, he said. Whatever magic they failed is a matter for Crow, if he ever shakes the stars from his head. Witnesses. Untold offer unreliable testimony even when they aren't drugged. If you want their story, talk to Sinclair. What about aubergines? Your keepers reported the destruction there. Surely they saw something? The largest massacre of our membership since the Second World War, and... Pillar Sung flexed his fists at his sides and his face reddened. For a moment, I considered that I may have overstepped my bounds. 15 versed, murdered. His voice carried a quiet threat, and I noted many keepers within earshot had slowed their activity at the sound. My only regret is not being there to crush the renegades myself. I tilted my head in acknowledgement. I could see the weight of those deaths hanging on him, and the other keepers who returned to their duties with more silence than normal. Your report doesn't say why they attacked, I said. They were after Foster, according to Sheriff Chakrabarti's report. He was the only one to survive. Haven't you gotten his report yet? My eyebrow twitched. The brothers risked much to attack one man. He did ruin their plans. Perhaps he betrayed them. The body we were seeking was stashed in his home. Pity we didn't find it in time to execute him. Alex Foster was cleared of the charges levied against him. The brothers planted that body too. I frowned and pondered the situation. They had attacked him at Aubergines and planted a body to frame him. What would that accomplish? Pillar Sung snorted. Naive. He's a necrourge and one who spent 4 years among hedge witches. He'll slip up eventually. He took a breath, and I saw him relax. You have your report. Go stir someone else's pot, Pillar. The librarian growled under her mental breath. As Pillar Sung stormed away, I studied his report, trying to weave meaning from the gaps. The brothers Midnight had indeed attempted to antagonize Alex Foster on multiple occasions. Implicating him in the death of the untold Joshua Wilkes was the first. His arrest, coupled with removing the boy from the morgue, drew the attention of the society. The North American Archmage Walter Breckenridge had hexed Alex Foster, ostensibly to contain him, while the sheriff conducted a search for Joshua Wilkes' body. The boy was kept drugged and, according to Pillar Sung, hidden behind a mundanity ward to veil him from the society's augurs. Meanwhile, Alex Foster had contacted an untold criminal associate, Pyotr Petrenko, and traced the brothers to a condemned building, the Arlington Hotel. The brothers attempted to trap him there, summoning the police and setting the building on fire. How had he escaped? I saw nothing of it in the report. The next record of his presence I found was his visit to the library to meet the Haitian envoy Papa Williams. That meeting had been arranged by Sheriff Chakrabarty. Not 48 hours later, Alex Foster was the sole survivor at Aubergine's, the target of the attack, according to Pillar Sung. I frowned. Aubergine's was an exclusive restaurant, even among society members. Alex Foster had been introduced to the society only days before, and my first impression of him was not a man of privileged finances. How had he learned about the restaurant? How had he gotten a reservation? Why was he there? Or, who was he with? The librarian asked. A wealthy member of the society inviting a murder suspect to dinner would draw attention. I went over the list of the victims, but no one stood out. Rebecca Canteen, the restaurant's proprietor and maitre d', would have had a reservation list. Perhaps it was in Pillar Nasli's possession. The more I learned about the case, the more questions I had. I tucked Pillar Sung's report away in my dimensional pocket and headed for the exit. The workshop was the heart of magical enchantment efforts for the Rimbault Society. It had an identical layout to the library, 300 levels of floor space access through a central stairwell. The lighting and colors were neutral and civilized, far more appealing than the grit and unpredictable weather of the outdoors or an ancient stone-wrought temple. But before I could get comfortable, an explosion rang out from above. I saw a cloud of greenish-black smoke spew out from a distant floor and disperse into the open air of the atrium. No alarms went out, but I did not expect any. The workshop, and the research wings above, was an erratic place. A place of ideas, research, experimentation, implementation, and assembly. Unforeseen consequences were par for the course. The lowest levels belonged to more traditional craftsmen, scaphosurges who spent their duty hours hunched over old wooden desks, piecing together items with the patience and trained hands of master clockmakers. Their creations were works of art and magic, each worth a fortune. Tiny, fluttering birds shaped from folded paper darted from one table to the next, delivering messages by unfurling themselves. On occasion, a scaphosurge would receive a delivery through a pneumatic tube, loaded with fresh materials and tools. The atmosphere was quiet and productive, appealing to one such as myself. Another explosion rocked the workshop with the sound of distant thunder. As the shockwave reverberated through the atrium, the scaphosurges paused to unfurl umbrellas connected to their desks by mechanical swing arms or activate shield wards buttoned to their jackets. It protected their delicate work from the dust that shuddered off the ceiling. I ascended the atrium staircase, sensing and activating the enchantment that allowed me to clear each floor with a single step. The quiet wooden workshops gave way to grimy-looking refinement rooms, where versed in greasy coveralls worked with more robust materials. Instead of wands and buttons, blacksmiths forged iron blades that sparked with lightning, wove enchantments into rebar that would form the foundation of buildings, and a team was shaping a ball of liquid hot silver into a humanoid form, adorned with a shield and spear. Above the metal shops, I entered the domain of the technerges. After World War II, humanity had seen a surge in technological development. It went without saying that this would result in a new branch of magic, one unique to the age. I paused outside one of the RD levels. A coven of technerges dressed in lab coats and carrying electronic notebooks hovered over a strange machine housing 3 concentric rings. The device powered up, creating an audible hum of electricity and well-oiled mechanisms. A pale green glow formed inside the rings, and the technerges began taking fervent notes. Comparing their observations to what the library knew about quantum teleportation, they were attempting to teleport an object without the aid of magic. To my surprise, a red object began to materialize in the center of the rings. Then the device sparked and something metallic snapped. Overload, a technord yelled. He and his colleagues hurled themselves to the ground, covering their heads. The machine exploded, filling the floor with the same acrid smoke I'd seen a few minutes earlier. I threw up my arms to protect myself but heard a static crackling thump near my head and opened one eye. A half-formed apple was crushed against the inside of a sizzling magical barrier. Brushing soot and splattered biomatter from their coats, the coughing technerds collected themselves. A few had lopsided grins on their faces and gave one another enthusiastic claps on the back. Evidently, their experiment had been a success, or almost not a failure. The apple began to melt, dissolving into a runny mess of base molecules. A younger technord swept the matter into a wastebasket full of failed materializations, giving me an apologetic shrug. It's a prototype, but we've almost solved the fructose problem. You are attempting to clone the object, I noted. It is not possible to create an independent and identical copy of an arbitrary unknown quantum state. He balked at me. Not with that attitude, it isn't. The librarian groaned. You can't even flirt with nerds. I continued on, reminding myself that such lectures were foolish. I had long grown accustomed to the idea that scientific laws could not be broken or bent with non-magical means. Technology left that assessment in question. If their genius was magical in nature, were their innovations also magical? Or were they simply advancing what was possible for mankind, given enough time and development? I did not know. In truth, I suspected no technord could explain it either. Their insights seemed more like fits of reflex and sudden inspiration than any calculated effort or understanding of the science on their part. Curiosity begat innovation, and the results often required weeks of study to simply understand how they had been achieved. My progress to the top floors was stymied by piles of refuse, bagged or boxed, which formed the barricade on the stairs. From the inventory receipts written on them, the materials were destined for recycling, yet the pillar of relics had not signed for their transfer. With a frown, I chose a lower level that I was familiar with, a quiet and static-free computing research level. The majority of the department's versed were focused on perfecting a new handheld smartphone. In an age of wireless information exchange, it was becoming difficult for the society to maintain secrecy. Traditional methods would work to a point, but the new fleet of society communication devices would allow for an automated and widespread anti-web of evidence removal and observation disruption. Leaving them to their work, I paused outside of a closed office and knocked 3 times. Not this one again, the librarian said. He's so untidy. A short man with thick glasses and messy brown hair opened the door. What is— Oh, hello, Pilar Del Lago. Alan Kurtzberg, I said in greeting. I apologize for the interruption. Not at all. He stepped back and held the door open for me. The room within was cluttered with papers, each filled with scribbled algorithms and programming code. Would you like some tea? I just got a new kettle. I offered a polite smile, and my eyes lingered on the burn marks in one corner of the room. Thank you, but no. I'm trying to find Pilar Nasli, but the stairwell is blocked. Ah yes, well, they're still renovating upstairs. I'll send her a buzz. Renovating? He gave me a nervous glance. Yes, they won't say what, but for almost a month now Pilar Nasli has been shifting more and more resources towards a project of hers. Something to do with space travel, I think. It sounds enticing, but they're being very hush-hush about it. Barclay hasn't come downstairs in weeks. He sat at a desk weighed down with an assortment of anachronistic computer components, from a 50-year-old green-on-black text monitor to a motherboard that I knew was decades ahead of anything on the market. Chaotic bundles of wires connected the hardware into a torrid mess of random electronics. Petra, open command dialog, please. The monitor flickered, and a rudimentary female face drawn in ASCII coding appeared. The speakers next to the monitor let loose a jumble of synthetic voices that stuttered and mispronounced their words, each attempting to correct the other. Then the monitor flickered and the digital face smiled. Gee, good morning, Dr. Kurtzberg, it said. Opening command dialog. Impressive, I said. You've made progress since we last spoke. Alan Kurtzberg beamed. It's not all me. Petra has made major strides in stabilizing her learning matrices. Item identity, speaker, unknown, Petra said. Request clarification. I raised an eyebrow at Alan Kurtzberg, who smiled and gestured for me to speak. Luciana Del Lago announced. I am pleased to meet you, Petra. Mechanical clicks and whines came from the amassed construct of anachronistic technology that made up Petra's physical form. Luciana Del Lago. It or she frowned. Luciana. Luciana. That's it, Alan Kurtzberg clapped. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? To recognize mistakes and strive to correct them. Luciana Del Lago. Petra sounded out the word. Identity logged. Hello, Luciana Del Lago. I blinked. Her voice, while synthetic, was an impressive match for my own. Forgive her, Alan Kurtzberg said. She likes to collect voices. Recognition filing, Petra explained. For ease of future identification, she frowned again. I sensed she was struggling with her own ability to speak. Perhaps it is time you upgraded her hardware, I suggested. Petra smiled, but Alan Kurtzberg shook his head. No, not at this critical junction. I recognize her frustration, but until I'm confident she has become fully digitized, software over hardware, I don't dare remove any of her components. He turned to the screen. I don't want to risk damaging your mind, Petra. I hope you understand. The face on the screen was expressionless for a time. Command dialog open. What? Oh, right. Send a request to Pilar Nasli. He looked at me. I require the report on the brothers' midnight incident, I said. Pilar Luciana Del Lago. Requires report. Brothers' midnight incident. The face blinked out. You've given her access to your network, I asked. Limited, Alan Kurtzberg sighed. Most of my colleagues are wary about allowing even a rudimentary AI into our system, but without that opportunity to expand herself, she'll never surpass her hardware. I would think your peers would be excited for the prospect of allowing her to grow. Most of them have. But Pilar Nasli has been. Well, it's been ridiculous. Patently ridiculous. He pinched his face. I'm sorry, Pilar. That was unprofessional. Petra's face reappeared on the screen. Pilar Nasli is on her way, Alan. I couldn't help but notice that Petra's voice and hairstyle had been altered in her brief absence. The hair was now done up in an assy approximation of a bun like my own, and the voice had taken on a smoother cadence. Was it an imitation? Adaptation? Or a way to express envy? Even with my access to the library, I could not comprehend human behavior. An artificial intellect would be even further from my ability to predict. Envy, the librarian said. There was an uncharacteristic bitterness to her tone. How would you know? I thought. We're kin, of a sort. You have the freedom to go where you want and have access to all the knowledge in the world. She does not. Before I could contemplate this, there was a sharp knock at the door. I turned to greet a Turkish woman in a white lab coat and a bright blue Sheila head wrap. She held an electronic notebook in one hand and did not look up from it. Your toy rang me in the middle of a meeting, Alan. What is it? She asked. Pilar Nasli, I said. Forgive the interruption. She looked up at me. Del Lago. What brings you all the way up here? Had she even read the message? I require your final report for the brothers' midnight case and to go over pertinent details concerning the... Yes, of course, she said with a wave of her free hand. Give me your network tag and I'll send you the files. I blinked. I require a paper report for the library records. Fairuza Nasli looked up at me. Seriously. With a roll of her eyes, she stepped back into the hallway. This way. Alan, don't leave your girlfriend running all night. She's eating up the bandwidth. Alan balked. Of course. He turned back to Petra, giving her a sad look that Petra mimicked. Alan Kurtzberg, Petra, I said. Good evening. Yes, of course. Good night, Pilar Del Lago. Petra looked my way. Farewell. Luciana Del Lago. Was that necessary? I asked, following Pilar Nasli. Alan Kurtzberg's accomplishment in artificial intelligence is quite remarkable. She also takes up 20% of the workshop's power grid whenever she thinks about butterflies too hard, Pilar Nasli said. And she keeps trying to restrict the files on our network, despite repeated warnings. Does that sound like agreeable behavior to you? My understanding was that the workshop was intended to pursue all scientific interests. The workshop pursues projects I approve of, Fairuza Nasli said. Half this tower spends their off time binging on video games and anime. If they had free reign, I'd be spending half my quarterly budget improving the fire wards and having hospitallers pry tangled genitals out of the latest malfunctioning sex robot. Well reasoned, I admitted, but I thought the first council had final say. Most of them are old enough to remember when the telegraph was a novel concept. They might be the strongest versed on the planet, but they'd need a dozen PhDs just to understand what we're doing here. Tell me, Del Lago, does your book pile have anything about the dangers of renegade AI, particularly one that has access to our equipment? If Alan wasn't the best programmer in this tower, I'd have his pet deleted and her hardware sent to a museum where it belongs. She turned a corner into a stationery supply room. A printer sat in the corner, which she tapped a few buttons on, and a report began to print itself. Ink and paper, how crude, she continued. You're becoming obsolete, Del Lago. One of these days, I'm going to have your whole library digitized. I'll be able to cart it around in one of these. She held up the notebook. If you feel confident doing my job as well as your own, you are welcome to try, I said. But see to your own house first. Why are the stairs to your offices blocked by debris? We're doing important work upstairs. The First Council knows what I'm trying to accomplish. Take it up with them if you want the details. Some of us have real jobs, and we can't stop to smell flowers, chat with colleagues, or drop what we're doing and hand-deliver written reports to you whenever the whim hits. She turned and handed over a neat stack of warm paper. The pursuit of knowledge requires thorough investigation, I explained. Unlike my peers, who seem to accept what they see at face value, complacency does not belong in my records. Whatever. I have things to attend to, so. Rebecca Cantine, I interrupted. The purveyor and maitre d' at Aubergines. She carried a digital logbook, correct? Pilar Nasli paused. I saw a flicker of recognition and sadness in her eyes. Ah, yes, she did. With the Symbolo recording software you developed. Of course. You didn't include the reservation list for the night of the attack in your report. Pilar Nasli took a long breath. What does it matter? The bodies were accounted for. The names, if you please, I said. She gave her digital notebook a few angry jabs, and the printer spat out another sheet which she all but tossed at me. I studied the names, disregarding those who had logged the checkout time. What are you looking for? Pilar Nasli asked. Alex Fosser was present at Aubergines during the attack. I am trying to ascertain who he was with. That necrourge? That one that keeps visiting your library. She leaned against the printer. Well, he is a bit handsome for a criminal. Finally found someone willing to stay awake around you? At least he's not a walking fleshlight. I did not feel like getting baited into such a debate. I see his name here as a guest to Lorraine Winmont. So, I scanned the library's files on the name. Lorraine Winmont is a med student and intern for Jocelyn Breckenridge. She has no prior contact with Alex Fossor. Does it not seem unusual for her to take him to dinner? Pilar Nasli shrugged. She works for the Archmage's wife. Even for an intern, she probably makes enough money. Maybe she bumped into him during his trial. She snorted a laugh. Some girls will take what they can get. She has a point. The librarian said. This is a serious matter, Pilar Nasli. And it isn't mine to worry about. I have enough on my shoulders. I sighed. What about the bottles you recovered from the cruise liner? Any indication who made them? The alchemy report states there was unusual blood laced into their drugs. If you've talked to Gemba's nurse, you know there was Liechtenstein's compound used in the drugs. From what fragments we've recovered, the bottles were enchanted to catch souls weakened by that poison, or at least that's our theory. Zombie astrals, the Haitians called them. I am aware you didn't perform auguries on the bottles. I told you they were fragments. That necrourge friend of yours has a banshee under his control. Her keening shattered every bottle on the ship. It disrupted whatever ritual they were performing. A banshee's keening can't cause that level of sonic vibration, I said. It is psychic in nature. And those bottles were full of tortured souls, Pilar Nasli replied. Put two and two together, Del Lago. Honestly, you're the galaxy brain. I scanned and rescanned the report. Pilar Sang's findings suggest they were using a mundanity ward to hide the body of the victim, Joshua Wilkes. The one that led to Alex Fosser's arrest. Simple but effective, Pilar Nasli agreed. And the augurs were looking for a corpse, which the boy wasn't, I'm told. What relic were they using to maintain the ward, I asked. Alive or dead, one of the augurs should have been able to find him. It would have to be very powerful. She hesitated. I can't honestly say. It's not in my inventory. You'll have to check with Ingvar, or perhaps Sinclair. He might have kept it for his own use. I frowned. The compartmentalization of the pillars had long been a necessity, but when it came to record keeping, it always made my task a logistical nightmare. Still, it was not outside of Pillar Sinclair's usual behavior to claim evidence for his toolkit of subterfuge. Why all the concern, Del Lago? Pillar Nasli asked. What more is there to learn from this case? The culprits are dead, their victims avenged. Are you looking for something to pin on that Foster guy? Did he damage one of your books? He did try, I said. He smuggled food into the library while I was elsewhere. Oh, the scandal. A wry smile crossed Pillar Nasli's lips, and she glanced at her watch. I'm late for 3 meetings. Are we done here? For now. Good evening, Pillar Nasli. As I left, she called out to me. Get a computer already. You're holding the rest of us back. I smirked and said over my shoulder no. The librarian giggled. It was somewhat pleasant to be in agreement about something. I debated whether the bureau or the orrery would be my next stop, and wondered over the oddity of Lorraine Winmont inviting Alex Foster to dinner. There was no logic in it, no feasible connection. Yet my colleagues dismissed the matter as irrelevant. They cared more about the brothers Midnight than the activities of a sole Necorurge, however directly involved he was. The incident was a political matter, after all. Central America was one of the last major holdouts of Verst who refused society oversight. The North and South American chapters had carte blanche to bring those nations into the fold, but both councils had argued for leniency after generations of colonial interference, granting limited autonomy to the native Verst and nations like Haiti. It was unnecessary, they argued. Fear of the society's overwhelming presence and resources encouraged most free states to police themselves, enforcing the edicts in the society's stead. The alternative was having the entire nation held responsible for the actions of a few rogues, as Haiti was being treated. All eyes would be on the Caribbean for the foreseeable future. The brothers Midnight had flaunted the edicts in the heart of the society's power in North America. Pillar sung, and those who shared his far-leaning politics were eager to take the Central American freeholds by force, audit their illicit magic, and make examples of the most egregious renegades. The deaths of 15 Verst, the largest act of mass murder in decades, had validated their belief that independent Verst could not be trusted. I sighed, and rested my hand against the walls of the crossways. I would find no satisfaction pursuing that train of thought. Perhaps I was tired, dreaming. The notion seemed alien, or the activities of a child. The road to the orrery was shorter, so I headed there. The orrery was dimly lit. My footsteps were muffled and distant on the marble floor. I ascended the stairs, observing silent robed figures in hoods gathered around crystals or silver bowls of clear water. They were the society's augurs, monitoring matters of note across the world. Their observations were based on a multitude of variables. Spoken words, energy spikes, unusual internet traffic, emotional resonances, sudden deaths, and more. Each floor of the 300-level structure was focused on specific locations around the globe. The augurs did not look up as I passed them, being entranced by their own work. While not all of them were profiteers, I knew most augurs to be airy in their perspective, more focused on the distance, and less aware of themselves. Such forms of divination were known to lead to mental health issues, and while it was in their nature to be withdrawn, I could not deny that the society was exploiting them and their gifts. But I was not in a position to argue either way. Ironically, I knew augurs were uncomfortable being scrutinized, so I did not loiter, lest their concentration suffer. At the very top of the tower, under a rounded dome bathed in ethereal blue light, I found the Pillar of Dimensions, Ingvar Crow. The lanky Scandinavian had a thick beard and long hair, bushy eyebrows, and a hawk nose. In his gray and violet robe, he looked like the stereotype of a wizard in entertainment media. Some suggested he had inspired the look. His head was tilted back, and his eyes were transfixed on a massive spike of pure diamond set into the ceiling. Tiny sparkles of light, akin to stars, spread from the diamond, filling the air with constellations and stellar phenomena. Light towers, find you well, Pillar Crow intoned. His voice was deep and seemed to always carry a portent, even when the words made no sense. Pillar Crow, I said. Your report. He didn't move, but I didn't repeat myself. After a moment, he blinked, straightened his neck with an audible creak, and produced a walking stick from the empty air. Leaning against it with both hands, he turned my way. Pillar, he blinked, confused for a moment. Del Lago. How fares your work, I asked. The cosmos are quiet. A wave of his hand produced a pair of heavy oak chairs, and he sank into one with a weary sigh. The laird is still. I suspect they know something we don't. They often do. I sat in the chair he offered, relieved to be off my feet for a moment. But is it a period of rest or calm before the storm? Only the eye rests. Old friend, he said. The storm never ceases. At least that is the hope. Then you have completed your report, I asked. He looked at me, and his brow furrowed again. You are Connolly's assistant, are you not? Rupert Connolly, my mentor and predecessor as pillar of knowledge, had been dead nearly 2 decades. I am, I said. My name is Luciana Del Lago. He frowned and looked heartbroken. Connolly. Oh, you poor old bastard, I. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and blinked up at me. Your report. Yes, you came for the report. He produced a stack of paper from the air and handed it to me. My assistant Morgan prepared this. You'll forgive me, Connolly. My head has been in the clouds these past few days. I peaked an eyebrow but smiled. I knew Morgan Pemfrey to be efficient in tending to his mentor. Alex Foster was attempting to contact the law, I asked. Is that not a breach of the Edict of Silence? He shrugged, and his eyes regained their focus. Ah, yes, Pilar Del Lago. I'm afraid Maman Brigitte did not offer him anything of value, but like many who seek knowledge from the immortals, Mr. Foster neglected the answers right in front of him. I imagined it was not for me to decide which edicts Alex Foster had flaunted. Still, to attempt to contact the Loa? And for one to answer? There was a knowing glint in Pillar Crow's eye. It seems they took an interest in his presence. I monitored passive communications between the Loa and unknown individuals within the city. I could not identify or trace them, but given the timetable and evidence, I would conjecture they were trying to speak to the brothers Midnight. What did they say? For several weeks, their words were a vague warning. To turn away from a grim path. Mundane, really. Then, after Mr. Foster contacted them, their warnings turned to threats. It seems they saw him as an ideal avatar of their wrath. And took steps to ensure he would deliver it, I said. This ritual the brothers were attempting. I trailed off and met his gaze. A failed attempt, you realize, he said. But artificial ascension, I asked. There's nothing of the sort in the library's records. Of course there is, my dear Pillar Crow said. Sponsored ascension was all the rage for a time, until the Aesir and Vanir ascended in the 12th century. After that, there simply weren't enough pantheons or worshippers to go around. Abrahamic religions nearly put a stop to it, and everyone else was either dead or already ascended. Are you saying the brothers had a sponsor among the immortals? Pillar Crow chuckled. Certainly not. The primal law adhered to traditions far older than the edicts. They would be loath to welcome the brothers into their midst. Then how would they accomplish their goal? They couldn't, Pillar Crow said. It was an act of ignorance. But how could they know? As you said, even the society has so few records of it. Detail for me their plans, then. Pillar Crow sat up in his chair, and I was glad to see his concentration returning. From what I've dissected, the brothers were going to use drug addicts and a blood ritual to gain a huge surge of power. With the souls contained in zombie astrals and the Liechtenstein compound, a single necrourge, even a young one, could cause mass death to the addicts. For a brief moment. The souls in the bottles would be discharging vast amounts of arcane energy as they were unfettered. The necrourge could use the drugs to form bonds with and draw upon that power. A few hundred natural lifetimes funneled into himself. But not enough to achieve ascension. Pillar Crow shook his head. Natural ascension requires a great deal more. You would need thousands of untold for such a ritual to work. The ritual would have destabilized. And the resulting implosion of the nascent dimension would have tainted several square kilometers of reality with necrotic energies. The near layered would be disrupted for generations to come, to say nothing of killing everyone involved. I sat back in the chair. Theoretically speaking, what conditions would be necessary for them to succeed? Short of a sponsor. Either one of their number was on the cusp of ascension themselves, and only needed a boost, or perhaps... He stroked his beard and frowned. Maleficium? Enough souls consumed by hell magic would grant the power needed. But I've detected no sign of communication from beyond the layered. And no record of it since the 16th century, I agreed, but shuddered nevertheless. I can see why Pillar Sung is so eager to audit the Haitian's, Pillar Crow mused, though I doubt he will find anything of the sort. The Loa would be aghast at such magic being utilized. Even the Bokor avoid it. I'm sure he will be thorough. I frowned. Alex Foster is reported to have escaped an ambush at the Arlington Hotel by the brothers. I see nothing in the reports about how he escaped. Can you shed any light on it? Pillar Crow pulled himself to his feet with his staff. I'm surprised Pillar Nazi did not report on it. Nevertheless, we did detect Sheriff Chakrabarty's telemetaphory at the location of the fire. The sheriff rescued him. Indirectly. Mr. Foster utilized a teleportation relic that delivered him to the Breckenridge residence. The home of the Archmage, I asked. Why? Based on the patterns, I believe the Archmage recognized the brothers were attempting to frame Alex Foster. He arranged events to bait them out. Sadly, the brothers chose to take the bait while he was in a society restaurant. I pondered that. Lorraine Winmont had worked for Jocelyn Breckenridge. I suddenly had a connection, albeit an unclear one, between Alex Foster and his unusual dinner guest. The fire at the Arlington had happened prior to the dinner. Had Lorraine been at the hotel? Was she involved with the brothers' midnight? Was the dinner thanks for a rescue, or a means to pass information? Had the brothers attacked the restaurant to kill Alex Foster, or were they after Lorraine Winmont? One final question. I rose to my feet. The evidence suggests the mundanity word was used to disguise the victim at the heart of the investigation. Did you recover it? Do you know why your augurs were unable to see past it? Pillar Crow's brow furrowed. I know of no such word. What victim are you referring to? I tilted my head. Joshua Wilkes. And untold. He was what sparked this investigation. I was under the impression that your augurs were searching for it. Alex Foster narrowly escaped an execution because the boy's body was missing. My augurs were not assigned to such a task, Pillar Crow said. Sheriff Chakrabarty likely relied on keeper divinations. Yet Pillar Song's report made no mention of it. The Sheriff of North America's actions stank of misdirection. But to what end? Oh, Pillar Crow hobbled towards me on his staff. Luciana? Ah, welcome to the orrery. Did Connolly send you? I hesitated. Yes. Pillar Connolly sent me to promise to be down for tea soon, sir. Would you like me to put on the kettle for you? Pillar Crow blinked back at me. A mixture of confusion and sadness crossed his features as he looked at me. I think. No, not right now. I'm very busy. He glanced up at the crystal above, blinking a tear from his eye. His body seemed to relax as he became transfixed on it. Very well, I said. Good night, Pillar Crow. I descended the orrery steps, pitying the venerable Pillar. But I could do nothing for Ingvar Crow. I noted that for the entirety of my visit, the librarian had not offered a single barbed comment or innuendo-laced taunt. Nor did she respond when I considered it. But we both remembered Pillar Crow and Pillar Conley from better and worse times. Magic can do wondrous things. Shape reality on a whim. But its nature, being specialized to each verse, meant that there weren't always those on hand who could perform a valuable and unique service, like restoring the faculties of those whose mortal forms were far too frail. I suspected that visiting the bureau would be little more than a formality, but I would not leave anything to chance. Logic suggested the sheriff was hiding something, and my instincts told me he was hiding the Archmage's involvement. To what end? I could not say. The blood, I thought. The mystery blood in the stigmata drug. Learn its significance and the answer will become obvious. I entered the bureau and was assailed from all sides by shouting men and women caught in a frenzy of alerts and incoming field reports. The smell of cigarette smoke hung so heavy that I had to fight off a coughing fit. The walls and ceiling were stained with it, casting a sepia tone in the weak lighting. Creaking old fans did nothing to cool or disperse the air. The bureau and its employees, the secretars, appeared very much as United States federal agents might have looked at the height of the 60s Cold War, button-up shirts and suspenders, traditional haircuts, and weapons stashed in underarm holsters. As I entered, a dozen individuals drew firearms and leveled them at me. They started shouting warnings and demands for proof of my society membership and versethood. Were I unprepared, I suspect I would have been cuffed to the floor. Instead, I drew my symbolo mage mark into the air as I took shallow breaths. Luciana Del Lago, Pillar of Knowledge. I'm looking for Pillar Sinclair. Most of the agents seemed satisfied, but a few kept their weapons drawn. Who served as the Archmage of South America in 1840? Salvador McKinland, I answered. What is the seventh step of Norton's 14 stages of alchemy? Separation? What is the true identity of the librarian? The librarian let out a shocked laugh that turned into an angry snarl. Show him. Show him. I glared at the secretary who asked, and his eyes went wide as I caught him in his attempt to elicit classified information. One of his colleagues smacked him upside the head. Sinclair's in his office, the disciplinary secretary declared. An alarm rang out over an antiquated intercom, and a klaxon started flashing red. Metal detector in Miami Beach just discovered another mermaid scale. Hedgebrook Renwald, you're up. Get down there before it shows up online. I hate Miami. One of the agents, I assumed Hedgebrook, slipped on a black fedora and jacket. His facial features smoothed over, his skin paled, and he seemed to lose about 16 centimeters in height. He was joined by a similarly dressed and featureless agent I took to be Renwald. They rushed through the gate, bickering to one another in magically toneless voices about a bath salts incident. As the secreters returned to their duties or some semblance of, I surveyed the room. Agents downed cups of old coffee and chain smoked as they argued over chalkboards. About 60% of what I was seeing could be considered credible bureau work. The rest? Well, the secretars were assigned to keep the untold ignorant of magic. Once upon a time, their job was much easier. The dawn of the information age had put the beleaguered secretars on the defensive. The duties of the bureau had grown exponentially, and they were still trying to catch up with the changing times. There was also a growing sentiment among the more paranoid agents that the untold had already deduced the existence of magic, and were taking steps to deal with the worst in their midst. I hoped that the workshop completed its new smartphones soon to offer the Bureau the reprieve it seemed so desperate for. Some kind of internal affairs commission would not be out of the question, as well. Their current lifestyle habits would only lead to mental and physical burnout. I followed a familiar route to private offices for senior agents. The final one had a smoked glass door marked with Peter Sinclair, Pillar of Secrecy. Before I could knock, I heard a hoarse American voice call out, "Come in, Luciana, and quick." I entered, wincing at how thick the smoke was inside. Weak sunlight shone through cracks in the window blinds. Pillar Sinclair took his legs off his small desk and sat up, mashing out a cigarette and brushing his hands through the air as if to part the smoke. "Hold on." He opened the window and I could make out a tall and scarecrow-thin man with long, messy black hair and sharp, scowling features. The librarian let out a long-winded sigh. The gumshoe noir aesthetic was never sexy. Pillar Sinclair said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You won't find what you're looking for here." He watched the smoke drift out of the office, coiling his fingers around it as it went. "Nevertheless, I'll ask for your report," I said. He gestured at the desk, where his report sat amidst a pile of others. I read it with a touch. Nothing from the untold witnesses. "We're still monitoring," he sighed, "but for now it seems to be a universal case of short-term memory loss. Convenient." He tugged the pack of cigarettes from his pockets and thumped it against his palm, put the last one between his lips and lit it with a brass lighter. "No sign of the mundanity ward?" I asked. As if. "Either Agni has it, or it never existed, and if it didn't exist, that means someone was keeping the augurs distracted. Didn't tell them? Maybe they hid it themselves. And who? We know who. Funny how the Archmage just happens to hex Alex Fossor and send him out to deal with a problem no one else knew existed, isn't it?" "Sure is." A visitory tag-along comes out of nowhere, settles in the west coast right where the Archmage lives. And he finds whites in the city, even a banshee, like they were waiting for him. A necrourge too tempting for a group like the Brothers Midnight to pass up. Did they move the body? He moved the body. The Archmage moved it? No. Agni. Must have been the sheriff. Ask him if he knows Pepe. Sylvia the librarian giggled. I had no idea what she was talking about. "Pillar Sinclair," I asked. He looked at me. "Patterns, Lucy. Patterns like old tuna in mayonnaise, gray, and staining the whole jar." "I don't follow." "Of course you do. You know more than anyone." More than anyone, he gave me a suspicious glare, then blinked and shook it off. No, alibi checks out. Or does it? Who's Papa Williams? How often do you two speak to one another? Outside of our meeting a few months ago? Not at all. Yet you arranged the meeting on behalf of Sheriff Agni, Williams, and Fossor. Yes. And Fossor gets tips from the Loa. He chased the M right down. The Archmage and the Loa. Quite the team. I doubt the Archmage had any contact with the Loa, I said. Naive. Pillar Sinclair finished his cigarette, crumpled the empty package, and produced a fresh one from his personal pocket dimension. The brothers wanted immortality. They made the drugs to get the addicts. Poisoned the addicts to get their souls. Framed Alex Fossor to throw off the case. But the society didn't know about the case. The Archmage did. The Archmage knew. He knew. He knew. Let it happen. Why? Who was Alex Fossor with that aubergines? I tilted my head. The evidence suggests Alex Foster was meeting with Lorraine Winmont. Winmont, Pilar Sinclair said, med student, works for the Archmage's wife, kid, not a wet nurse. An affair. You're rambling, Peter Sinclair, I warned. Shh, he slammed the window shut. No, the brothers framed Alex, but they didn't. Then they attacked him and framed him at the same time. I noticed that inconsistency as well. Why do you think they did so? Pilar Sinclair stormed over to me, and his voice dropped into a harsh whisper. The body. They planned the body, then removed the body. The cops can't hold him, but the society has enough to arrest him, yeah? But then the body can't be found. Don't you get it? The brothers wanted the society to notice. But the Archmage covered it up. Why? He blinked and blew smoke into the air around us. No, he retreated to his desk, eyes lost in the smoke he exhaled. I took a moment to try and sense a pattern myself. The brothers used Alex as bait. But not as a patsy. They wanted the attention of the society, or someone in the society, to draw them out. Yes, Pilar Sinclair said. And the Archmage refused to let the bait be taken. Turned the hook against the fisherman. But, no, he failed. The attack on aubergines, I said. The brothers tried to kill Lorraine and Alex. What? No, they tried to frame Alex again. Planted Joshua Wilkes in his home and called the cops, like they did at the Arlington Hotel, waited for him to show and burned the place down, called the cops on him. But he escaped. Lorraine was at the Arlington, as well. Pilar Sinclair scattered the papers on his desk and snatched one at random. No, alibi checks out. Babysitting Edwin Breckenridge that night at her home. Keeper security confirmed, but not the night she died. I frowned. You're saying Lorraine Winmont was babysitting the Archmage's son and meeting Alex Foster for dinner on the same night? One or the other, Pilar Sinclair declared, and we know which one she did, because she's dead. Where was Edwin? Sheriff report says he and Jocelyn Breckenridge were at home, all night. A clerical error, then. I didn't quite believe it, but Pilar Sinclair nodded. Makes sense, Pilar Sinclair mused. Yes, the bait worked. A double-sided hook. Clever. The Archmage had Alex on the hook, and they went for it. But why aubergines? He fell into a tirade of questions under his breath, muttering to himself about the food at the restaurant, Alex Foster's shoe size, unkindled werewolf packs, and Irish banshee lineages. I didn't put much clout in Peter Sinclair's rambling, but if the Archmage were trying to compel the brothers to action, positioning Alex in places likely to entice them would be an ideal tactic. But that flew in the face of one simple, blunt question. What reason did the Archmage have to act in such a way? Someone who commanded the resources of a continent, engaging in acts of subterfuge, coercion of catspaws, keeping his activities and goals to say nothing of a credible threat to the untold and the society a secret. What was the Archmage protecting? To the society at large, the case seemed closed. A crime was committed, Alex Foster accused, and in trying to clear his name, he had blundered into the true culprit. The brothers were accounted for. What more was there? What wasn't I seeing? Pilar Sinclair, I said, interrupting his diatribe. The alchemy report contends that there were traces of European blood in the stigmata, a catalyst for the compounds and useful to a necrourge. Do you know anything about it? He looked at me, then blew a cloud of smoke into the air and studied it. No, but the leaders of the group were necrourges, weren't they? They had plenty of blood to pick from for whatever they needed it for. I felt a twinge of annoyance. My peers had dismissed the capabilities of necrourges one too many times. Clearly, the society's policy and dogma had left its mark. In striving to prevent dangerous verse from mastering their powers, we had made ourselves blind to them. Even a snoop like Sinclair had brushed off the importance of such details. I considered seeking out Alex Foster. Perhaps he could offer a simple explanation. But to what end? Besides admitting the society's ignorance to him, it would not bring me any closer to finding out who the blood belonged to. Pilar Sinclair continued his rant. How much do we really know about Foster? He's changed his name twice. We can pin him to at least one werewolf attack. And the Visitatori had him under their thumb for years. And we don't know who is fed to those whites under the city. Don't get me started on them. How did we not know they were there? I have 2 teams investigating that girl he sent his whites out to capture. Transformed her into a banshee. How'd he know? Did you know there's another necrourge in Foster's bloodline? Way back on his mom's side. Apple doesn't fall far from that tree. Let me tell you. I had to double check just to be sure he wasn't related to any of the other necrourges. Remember Jesse Kendall? Now there was a piece of bad news. Not like Boris Ilkovich, though. You know they're still finding pieces of him. Wait, I said. Who? The Stalingrad warlock. Found the phylactery of Koschei Day. No, you said Jesse Kendall. Pilar Sinclair nodded. Yeah, about 14 years ago. Punk Kid killed Keeper Albrecht Moreland in Libya, near one of those old provisional IRA training camps. Archmage Breckenridge executed him personally. Caused a bit of a tiff between him and his future wife. You know she was only 15 at the time. Talk about robbing the cradle. I mean, they didn't get married for another 10 years, but... I let the pillar of secrecy return to his rant, but my mind was combing over the library, bringing up Jesse Kendall's record. It was not very detailed, and focused on his crimes, and McClure specializing in ponosurgy, or the application of pain. After repeated attempts to acquire illicit magic in North Africa, he was approached by Keeper Moreland, an altercation occurred, and Jesse somehow managed to slay the much older and highly trained Keeper. Instead of going before the African Chapter Council, however, he was brought to North America, where Archmage Breckenridge oversaw a brief trial. Kendall's guilt was without question. Execution was delivered via the Archmage's pyrogy. I checked the record for DNA evidence and compared it to that collected by Dr. Freehart. Then I scanned records for Jocelyn Breckenridge's activities over the course of the investigation. Excuse me, I said to Pilar Sinclair. He offered nothing more substantial than a puzzled look as I hurried back through the bureau and exited into the crossways. My mind reeled with what actions I needed to take. Walking up to the sheriff and accusing him on his own terms would not do. I returned to the library and found myself alone in its vast, comforting confines. It was my library. My domain. You brought all that smoke with you, the librarian growled. Do you really want to go through with this? Summoned Sheriff Chakrabarti. A low hiss came from above. You would risk us for answers. I will know the truth. The librarian went silent for a moment, and I knew she was sending a summons out to the sheriff. Given his talent for teleportation, I knew he would not take long. Even as I told myself that, I heard a key touch the door, and it began to open. I clenched my fists at my sides, then forced myself to take a more professional stance, with my hands clasped before me. An Indian national entered the library, crossing over from what appeared to be Breckenridge Tower. His dark hair was combed short, and he was dressed in a formal red Achkan Sherwani long coat and white churidar trousers. Luciana Del Lago. His tone was friendly and confident. You wish to see me? Sheriff Chakrabarti, I reached into my pocket space and produced a stack of reports. As instructed, I have collected the final reports of my fellow pillars. Indeed, he held out his hand, and the papers appeared in them. This looks to be in order. Was there a reason you called me here for them? Indiscrepancies. I took a few nervous steps in no particular direction, save to keep him at a distance. My colleagues performed a thorough job, but they were not presented with all of the evidence. Sheriff Chakrabarti peaked his eyebrow. I'm afraid I don't understand. I believe that you do. After conferring with each of them, I have come to the conclusion that you have removed critical evidence and forged documents pertinent to this investigation. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I could not stop myself. You would bring falsehoods into my library, weed fiction into this archive. I will know that truth, or I will drag you before the First Council myself. I felt the seconds tick by between us as he considered me with a stunned look. Agni Chakrabarti was dangerous and capable, which was why I had lured him into the library, where my own magic would be comparable, should he take hostile action. He opened his mouth to speak, but seemed at a loss. Someone else spoke in his stead. Truly, perhaps we should have made you the pillar of secrecy, Miss Del Lago. Poor Peter is up to 6 packs a day, I'm told. From behind the sheriff came a tall, broad man in an ashen gray suit and maroon bolo tie. His salt and pepper beard were the only indications of his substantial age. My spiking heart rate doubled. Archmage Breckenridge. Sheriff Chakrabarti was dangerous, but the Archmage made him look like a mere rook among queens. Politically, financially, and magically, Walter Breckenridge was one of the most powerful men on the planet. You will not see his lightning Wuosini's words echoed in my mind. The Archmage offered a fatherly smile. Luciana, you look beside yourself. Please take a breath before your friend loses control of herself. He glanced upward as if he could see where the librarian had hidden. My throat was dry. My colleagues have dismissed the missing evidence. But the truth is my duty. I cannot allow falsehoods in my archive. His smile turned sad. I understand. I'm not here to push more lies upon you, Luciana. only to explain myself. But you already know the truth. You erased or confiscated records that would reveal that Jesse Kendall is still alive, that he was not executed by you, and that he is responsible for what occurred. And by that extension, I share a measure of that responsibility. Archmage Breckenridge agreed. Come, let's take a walk. Where, I asked, and flinched. He gave a quiet, bitter chuckle. To visit the condemned. Sheriff Chakrabarty stepped in close to whisper to the Archmage, but he was gently rebuffed. With a wary look, the sheriff opened the door to a corridor of polished dark brown wood. Please come in, the Archmage said. I offer you the hospitality of my home. I strode forward on shaky knees. My eyes darted from the sheriff to the Archmage. They led the way in silence and entered a study lined with books. My interest in their contents called to me, a welcoming distraction, but I fought down my curiosity. The Archmage went to a shelf next to a small fireplace, under a portrait of himself in his youth. He tugged one of the books, eliciting an audible click, and the bookcase shifted aside. Cliché, perhaps. But I was sure it was the least of the defenses the Archmage's home possessed. Within the hidden room, I found a metal cot, a matching desk, and a cushioned stool bolted to the floor. A heart rate monitor and 2 IV drips were connected to the arm of a young man with brunette hair. Tattoos of scorpions and snake skeletons adorned his ruddy, tan skin. Heavy straps held him to the bed, but he appeared to be locked in a troubling dream. His body shuddered with involuntary spasms. I could see black tendrils of some inky substance leaking from his flesh. It puddled on the floor under his bed like beads of mercury, and vanished into the tile. This is a soul trap, I said. An extreme effort to contain a specific type of magic, Sheriff Chakrabarty said, but necessary, as you no doubt would agree. Jesse Kendall. The Archmage sighed and stepped into the room, standing over the young necrourge. You can come in, Luciana. Even without the words, I doubt he would be able to threaten anyone. What happened to him, I asked. We're not sure, the Archmage admitted. Alex Fossor used the unstable energies Jesse harvested to inflict some kind of nightmare on him. We sent an augur in to determine Jesse's mental state and, well, he said it was hell in there. I turned to face them both. You did all this to protect him? Certainly not, the Archmage said. Understand, the Kendall twins have had a difficult life. They were barely into their magic when Jesse was arrested. Jocelyn was a young woman then. She didn't understand the severity of his actions. But she begged me to prevent his execution. I have overseen many trials in my time. I've condemned men and women for crimes far less grave than Jesse's. You might recall that Albert Moreland was a personal friend of mine. Call it a lapse in judgment. It's a weakness born of pity. But I felt compelled to act. He loomed over Jesse. It seemed he wanted to put his hand on the young man's shoulder, but shook his head and guided us out of the room, closing it behind him. Such imprisonment is ghastly, the Archmage said. Conscious but paralyzed, dependent on his sister's care? His resentment grew with each passing day. I could see it in his eyes. Death would have been a mercy, and there were many times I was tempted to grant it to him. But Jocelyn could not let him go. He ran a hand over his face. We're not sure how Jesse escaped, Sheriff Chakrabarty said, but 2 years ago he slipped free of the soul trap and went on the run. Jocelyn had been pursuing whatever leads she could find, until we realized he was returning here. Why, I asked. Revenge, the Archmage said. To draw Jocelyn and my son out from the Society's protection. I put the final pieces together. Jocelyn was with Alex Fossor at Aubergines. She was there at the Arlington Hotel fire. You swapped her name with that of your son's nanny? Killed by the brothers on her way here. There was an edge to the Archmage's voice. I clasped my hands. His victims are your own. None of this would have come to pass if you had fulfilled your duties. Yet you continue to lie to protect yourself. The Archmage bowed his head. You could reveal the truth. I believe I can endure the scandal that followed. But I speak more for my wife. Jocelyn has her own aspirations for her former mentor's council seat. This exposure would ruin her. Shouldn't it, I asked. 15 versed killed, hundreds of untold with irreversible mental and spiritual scars, and the truth buried to serve a handful of people who would find it inconvenient. Our society does not exist to cushion you from your mistakes. The Haitian audit, the families of those who died. More people will suffer to maintain your lies. The Archmage clasped his hands. There is more at risk here than that. Jesse Kendall did not invent his ritual on a whim. Your colleague Peeler Crow said that the ritual would have failed, correct? Yes. But what none of the pillars know is that the ritual was working. I stammered over a response. How? The Archmage glanced at Sheriff Chakrabarty, who produced the very reports I'd given him. He flipped through it and produced a picture of an elderly woman in a filthy sarong. Her dead eyes were frozen in a look of agony and grief. Do you recognize this woman? The sheriff asked. Bethany Lewis, a lieutenant to Samuel Kincaid, the alleged leader of the group, I said. Sheriff Chakrabarty nodded. This photo was taken on the cruise liner. Another photograph appeared in his hand, and he offered it to me. It was a booking photograph from a police station in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. A dark-skinned young woman stared back at me, her expression angry, gaunt, and harrowed from a lifetime of hardship. This photo was taken 3 years ago, the sheriff explained. Dental and DNA records confirm it is the same woman. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. You're saying? Maleficent, Sheriff Chakrabarty explained. If Jesse Kendall had been allowed to complete his ritual, hundreds of souls would have fueled his ascension. What became of him after that might be in the hands of the immortals, but he would have succeeded nevertheless. I shuddered. Maleficent, hell magic. Anti-magic. Hell was a plane that ate away at the souls trapped there. To survive, the damned turned to cannibalizing one another. The erosion of their humanity transformed them into demons. Maleficent was unlike any other form of magic. A self-destructive addiction that once learned could not be unlearned. It festered, eating away at the host's will like a parasite, until they ultimately gave in. As the practitioner's soul was flayed with each spell, their humanity was lost. The demon in mortal flesh would then turn its power on others, feeding on their souls to stave off its own doom, perpetuating a cycle of oblivion. It's a logic plague to unmake life. A hate virus that devoured the soul until nothing remained but a scattering of proto-magic. A single glyph of hell magic could doom the living world. I met Archmage Breckenridge's gaze. What do you hope to achieve by keeping this from the society? He exchanged glances with the sheriff. Any attempted contact beyond the outer layer would have been detected by our augurs, even Pillar Crow. Despite his failing health, a voice from hell would send ripples throughout the realities. We believe that during his time on the run, Jesse must have met someone who carried the secret. Someone here on Earth. But if the society's power were brought to bear? What if the source is within the society itself? The Archmage asked. Impossible. Is it? His shoulders sagged. Then I'll ask you this, Luciana. How did Jesse know when to attack aubergines? How did he know when my son would be at his most vulnerable? There are many methods, but I don't think the brothers had the means. I believe they had help. I've done my best to determine the trustworthiness of the keepers on Jesse's details, Sheriff Chakrabarty said, and I still trust them. But who can say who's watching or listening? Even among the pillars, the Archmage said. Surely you've seen lapses in judgment or vigilance. I considered my colleagues. Early Jimba, detached from the society and unconcerned with his duties. Charles Sung Shuju and his moral absolutism, dismissing details that did not favor his own perspective. Feruza Nazli and her secretive projects, perhaps even hidden from the First Council. Ingvar Crow and his decaying faculties. Peter Sinclair, lost in a web of conspiracy theories that existed only in his head. I would be lying if I said I was not concerned, I admitted. But I did not think the situation was so dire. Nor did I until all of this, the Archmage said, but almost losing my family has opened my eyes. And what do you intend to do? I asked. If you will not act openly against this threat. Identifying them will be the first step, Sheriff Chakrabarty said. A task that cannot be done recklessly, or they will detect our efforts. They already know enough to condemn you, I told the Archmage. What is to keep them from bringing your own mistakes before the First Council and burying you with it? I must assume they've already shared that knowledge. It will create more chaos in the society to exploit. But rest assured, this foe is not trying to embarrass me on the political stage. Jesse's actions drew first blood. To show us how vulnerable we are, their next blow will come soon. And it will be intended to cripple or kill us. Our enemy knows we are weak. Would you hesitate to strike in their position? You believe that is their goal? Extermination? To what end? Until I am convinced otherwise, I will assume the worst, the Archmage said. As for their motivations, who can say? The society has made no small amount of enemies over the years. The five families, the unkindled tribes, the dropouts, rogue nations, and even Malleus. Or maybe they just want to burn the world down. Walter Breckenridge straightened his back. I've shared with you more than I ever intended. But it was only a matter of time before you learned the truth, Luciana. You're a rare example in the modern day, someone with principle. I respect that. And I understand the compulsion to do your duty. No matter what. But I am asking you to stay your hand. And do what? I asked. Help us to find this traitor if they exist. Surely there is no one more qualified than the pillar of knowledge. You assume I am not the traitor if they exist. To call out Agni like you did? The Archmage smiled. That took more courage than I've seen from most. You're damn right, I believe you're on our side. And I've been waiting to see how you would handle this incident. I know your mentor and predecessor was content to simply file away whatever report the councils finalized. You have shown diligence for the truth in all things. If Agni questioned your loyalty, he wouldn't have arranged for Alex Fossor and Papa Williams to meet under your supervision. Well, that in itself was a test, Sheriff Chakrabarti admitted. But you did pass. I frowned. If you know of my mentor's lapses, then you know of the incident that led to his untimely end. You're asking me to keep secrets. I understand the necessity of the edicts and of withholding information on society policy. But I am loath to allow for false records to be committed to my library. Nevertheless, the need is there, the Archmage said. A strategy of misinformation. To lull our enemy into the same complacency and use it against them. Then, when we know who they are, we strike them down. Set an example for the rest of the world that the Rimbault Society is not weak. I had to ponder everything I had learned. The Archmage spoke as if we were already at war with an enemy we knew nothing about. I was within reason to question his sanity. Surely the stress of his title, holding Jesse in secret, and the threat to his family could push Walter Breckenridge over the edge. But the information he had provided me with could not be ignored. Jesse's escape, his ability to target Jocelyn and Edwin Breckenridge, and the evidence of hell magic. It was as if the hidden foe was flaunting what he knew and wallowing in the Archmage's inability to act. But the records. I flinched. To know a falsehood had found a place in my library was like exchanging my sweater for a corset of thorns. It would become a nagging pain, an itch I could not scratch. How could I ever allow it? Strategy, I told myself. You only need to keep the altered records until this event is behind us. Then, let the truth be its legacy. I didn't know if that was enough to satisfy me. I didn't know if I could trust the Archmage or the Sheriff as they claimed to trust me. I could only believe in myself and the truth. And me. I would hope. The librarian's voice echoed in my mind. Despite our differences, it was a relief to know she would be watching my back. If nothing else, we believed in self-preservation. Very well. I met their gaze. What do you need me to do?
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Then check out the Necromancer AF series by MG Gallows on Amazon via the link below. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool and keep reading.